The Honourable Jeremy Buckingham.
Thank you, Mr President. I move private members' business item number 3134. Thank you very much, Mr President, and thank you very much to the House for that. Standing in my name. Mr President, I rise to speak to this motion and draw attention to something that should be obvious, but somehow isn't reflected in our laws. Right now, two things are happening at once. On the one hand, the TGA and APRA are stepping in to restore integrity to the medical cannabis system. They are saying quite rightly that prescribing must be grounded in proper medicine, not quick scripts, not high volume turnover, not business models dressed up as healthcare, but real medicine. And that matters because medicinal cannabis is not fringe anymore. It is a legitimate treatment relied upon by thousands of Australians across New South Wales and Australia, and now globally also. But we must be crystal clear. Parts of the system have drifted. Prescribing became too fast, too loose, too commercial, and when that happens, confidence in the entire system is put at risk. So the regulators have stepped in, and what we are seeing now is not a shutdown, but a correction to bring the system back into its original guidelines and purpose. Patients themselves are saying what used to be fast and high volume are now slower and longer, more deliberate consultations in person, that scrutiny with a doctor, with a health practitioner, that scrutiny is higher and that prescribing is more disciplined. And we welcome that, and that shows the system is working. This is not a failure, but a system that is being brought back into line. And we should support that, because if medicinal cannabis is to be taken seriously, as it should be, then it must be prescribed seriously. But here is where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore, Mr President. While the regulators are tightening the front end of the system, making it more clinical, more accountable and legitimate, the law at the back end has not moved at all. We are still operating under not fit-for-purpose roadside drug testing laws that are based on presence and not impairment. So to put it plainly, the state is saying to patients, go to your doctors, follow the rules, engage with the regulated system. But then on the other hand, if that same patient gets behind the wheel, unimpaired, compliant, following their doctor's directions, doing everything right, as other people do with their medications, they risk losing their licence and their livelihoods simply because a roadside test detects any presence of THC. Not impaired, just presence. That doesn't appear to be a minor inconsistency. It looks like a structural contradiction, and that undermines everything the regulators are trying to achieve. Because what message does that send? It tells patients you can be lawful but still be punished. It tells doctors you can prescribe responsibly, but your patient carry the risk of losing their licence and possibly their livelihood and being uninsured on the road. Also, another major issue. It tells the public that the system is not coherent. Now, let me place on the record for absolute clarity, no one in this place is arguing for impaired driving in any way, shape or form for any reason. If somebody is impaired, they should not be on the road, full stop. But that is not what the current law measures. It measures presence. The presence is not the same thing as impairment. We all know that. The science is clear. The lived experience is clear. And increasingly, the policy contradiction is clear. Mr President, medicinal cannabis has been legal in Australia for 10 years. There obviously are people who are flouting the laws and driving on the road with medicinal cannabis, and we have not seen an increase in the road toll in that period associated with medicinal cannabis or cannabis use across New South Wales or Australia. But we have to deal with those inconsistencies. So what this motion does is simple but important. It supports the regulators in doing their job. It supports higher clinical standards. It supports the integrity of the medicinal cannabis system. It welcomes the cowboys in a new industry who are getting rich being driven out, the people who are offering up golf sticks and holidays to those doctors who prescribe more. But it also says if we're going to have a legitimate medicine, as we already have, then our laws must reflect that reality, because you cannot on one hand legitimise a medicine, on the other punish people for taking it as prescribed. Thank you, Mr President. I commend the motion to the House.
Thank you very much. The Honourable Courtney Houssos.
Thank you, Mr President. And can I acknowledge at the outset that the government is not opposing the motion. And I just, after that thoughtful and well-reasoned argument from the Honourable Jeremy Buckingham, can I just thank him for bringing this matter to the attention of the House and for the constructive engagement that he's got. These are complex issues, and I will respond from a government perspective and lead from a government perspective, largely from a health perspective. But if I can say, I think the practical consequences and the really reasoned way that he's outlined that is the reason why we're not opposing the motion, and we welcome the advocacy. We acknowledge that we don't necessarily have answers today, but I can certainly assure the member and the House that this is on the agenda of the Minister for Roads, and she's absolutely aware of it. And this is certainly something that governments around the world are confronting, the question of impairment and presence, and we welcome that advocacy. In relation to from a health perspective, in New South Wales, the member would be aware, but perhaps the House it might be helpful to update the House. In New South Wales, any medical practitioner or authorised nurse practitioner can prescribe a cannabis medicine if they believe it's an appropriate treatment option and have obtained approval from the Therapeutic Goods Administration. In some instances, additional approval from New South Wales Health may be required, as with any prescribing. Legal obligations and responsibility for the patient's treatment do lie with that prescribing practitioner, as is appropriate. Most cannabis, I'm advised that most cannabis medicines are not registered on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, meaning that they haven't been evaluated to ensure they meet the same standards of safety, quality and effectiveness as registered medicines. Patients may still, I'm told, be prescribed unregistered cannabis medicines. However, this requires a discussion of potential risks, benefits and uncertainties. Now, members would be aware that the TGA is currently reviewing the safety and regulatory oversight of unregistered medicinal cannabis products in Australia. An initial 8-week public consultation closed in October 2025. New South Wales Health supports this review and made a submission advocating a balanced approach that protects patient safety while preserving appropriate access. So it's only appropriate that New South Wales Health supports a staged reform program led by a national task force to coordinate action, address regulatory gaps in telehealth prescribing, review appropriate pathways for prescribing unregistered medicines, and improve oversight of high-risk medicines such as medicinal cannabis. This really is a new area. There's certainly some practical implications for us as a state government, and we'll work through those as we usually do in a careful and a methodical way, but we appreciate and won't be opposing the motion today.
Thank you very much. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, I also acknowledge the expertise of the mover of the motion and his advocacy in this area. But there's just one. I foreshadow that. Well, I do move this though. The question be amended by omitting parts 8D and 8E, and it's extraordinary that the government would support a motion in circumstances where there is no recognised test for impairment. Or in relation to driving a motor vehicle whilst impaired and potentially impacted by medicinal cannabis. Now, I get it that we may get to the position where that impairment test might be there in circumstances where a person could say, yes, I do have a script for medicinal cannabis, but I am not impaired. But as we stand here today, there is no such test in existence, and for the government and to accept that we would recognise the need to align medicinal cannabis policy with roadside drug testing laws so that lawful unimpaired patients are not unfairly penalised, and then consider legislative reforms including the introduction of a medical defence to ensure that roadside drug testing frameworks reflect the impairment rather than mere presence. That's fine if you've got the impairment test. So, whilst I recognise the body of work which and all the preceding paragraphs in this, in which we would will be supporting, subject to that amendment, this particular motion in relation to those components of it which relate to driving a motor vehicle are premature in circumstances where there is no such test available. So, Mr President, it's a very short submission by us. I welcome the member bringing the motion, and I acknowledge the work that he has done in relation to it, and I acknowledge the observations that he makes in relation to ensuring that medicinal cannabis is properly regulated. However, that regulation, insofar as it impacts on people being on the road, potentially impaired in circumstances where they have taken medicinal cannabis, that is premature, and the opposition will not be supporting those two paragraphs.
Thank you very much. Ms Kate Fairman.
Thank you, Mr President. The Greens rise to support this motion, and as we have supported all efforts to get common sense laws passed, motions passed in this place that support medicinal cannabis, I agree that it's good to see the initial I suppose, rush towards medicinal cannabis, not as regulated as perhaps was needed. It is a good thing that that has been reined in, and so we support the first parts of the motion, and of course the last parts, particularly calling for the government to align medicinal cannabis policy with roadside drug testing laws. I've got a bill before the Parliament's coming up much later today, if it does at all, yeah, we're moving quite quickly, aren't we? To provide that medical defence for people caught using medicinal cannabis who aren't impaired, who may have traces of THC in their system. I just wanted to address what the Honourable Damien Tudor-Hope said in terms of the complexities around not having that impairment test available. The hypocrisy for that, though, is that we're talking about the fact that this is now a legitimate, legal, prescribed drug, and there are other legitimate, legal, prescribed drugs, such as opioids, that people could also be driving and be impaired. And this is the whole conundrum, the whole problem, the whole policy complexity that we need to fix, that we made medicinal cannabis legal 10 years ago. The road laws haven't kept up. If we applied that logic to all of the drugs, so all of the prescription drugs, what world would we be in, to be honest, where somebody takes Panadine Fort, they're told not to drive for, say, 4 hours, whatever it is, maybe not drive at all, but that's the same. That's the same with medicinal cannabis. And we trust drivers to, and we trust, the doctors to give the right information, but that's what we're trying to fix. So if we start looking at the impairment, we should be testing for impairment in all drivers that are pulled over, but we don't. So people are grappling with it, other jurisdictions are grappling with it in terms of a percentage of THC, what have you. But at some point you're either impaired or you're not by the drugs that we are taking or by the sleep we didn't have last night. And that, I think, is why this whole debate is frustrating. Let's get it done. Let's get it done this year.
Time has expired. The Honourable Stephen Lawrence.
Mr President, I wanted to make a contribution to this debate, and I was thinking back to our inquiry into the regulatory framework for cannabis, and we actually made a finding that the medicinal cannabis scheme is being used or was being used to facilitate recreational use, and that was something that a number of witnesses came along and said, and there was indeed some criticisms of the regulatory scheme. And some people, of course, were quite happy about that because they see that, I suppose, as a beachhead towards legalisation. But I think the motion is very appropriate indeed in recognising the importance of the TGA review and the fact that this is being tightened, because irrespective of one's view about legalisation, if it's seen as a discredited scheme in effect, if it's seen as just a way to facilitate use of a drug that is otherwise illegal, it will lose, I think, regulatory, governmental and community support. Wanted to say a few things as well about the driving issues. That's just been talked about. Ms Kate Fairman just made a contribution, essentially, as I understood it, arguing that medicinal cannabis should really be regulated in the same way as other prescription drugs. Look, I don't really think that that is a realistic approach, and I say that for a number of reasons. If one, for example, compares cannabis and Valium, true, both have an adverse interaction with driving, but cannabis is used in the community at a far greater level. And the adverse effect on road safety, if we ultimately went to a simple system where if you test positive on the roadside, all you've got to do is show your prescription and you can drive away, I think that would have a significantly detrimental impact on road safety. But also there's another issue here, and I remember Kevin Saul, the late Kevin Saul, a good mate of mine in Dubbo, whose son Brendan was killed in a traffic accident in Dubbo that actually led to, in part, the scheme that we've got. And I used to discuss these matters with him a lot, and he had a really strong view about it. And he used to always just say to me, but it's illegal. It's an illegal drug. It's an illegal drug. How can you sort of have these different systems and, you know, ways of regulating it that aren't sort of based on that? And there's something in that, not least in the fact that because it is a very widespread illegal drug that really adversely interacts with driving, you've got to have an impairment-based test. We can't, I don't think, simply have a system where you're stopped by the police officer, you show you've got a prescription and you can drive on your way. The change in this area that the door has been opened to, I would certainly express a strong view that we would need to move to an impairment-based testing model. And I noticed what the Honourable Damien Tudor-Hope said, but I think back to the cannabis inquiry, and in fact, a number of jurisdictions have moved to impairment-based testing. The science and technology, I think, is there, and I
The
think
member's
that is
time
probably
has
the way
expired.
forward.
Ms Abigail Boyd.
Thank you, Mr President. I just wanted to make a very short contribution. Just to note that the amendments to the workers' compensation legislation that were unfortunately passed by this House earlier this year removed medicinal cannabis from the treatments available to people on workers' compensation, which is an incredible tragedy for those, particularly the 150 medically retired police officers with PTSD who have been stripped of their medicinal cannabis prescriptions. I would hope that all members keep these issues in mind and try and exercise some consistency in their support for medicinal cannabis when thinking about workers' compensation reforms in the future.
Is anyone seeking the call?
Yes.
The Honourable Sarah
Thank you.
Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise to speak to this motion, and I just wanted to echo my support for the amendment moved by the Leader of the Opposition to remove the parts of the motion that deal with the issues around roadside drug testing laws. I think he covered that quite eloquently, and I don't want to go over those points, but I think that's the part of the motion that is quite contentious in terms of whether or not there is actually the ability to do that properly. But the rest of the motion I think is very good, and I do acknowledge and commend the member for moving it. The Honourable Stephen Lawrence talked about the inquiry that he was involved in. Well, back in the day, back in 2013, Mr President, I'd only been here for a couple of years, we, funnily enough, had another inquiry, and it was into medicinal cannabis. I was fortunate to chair that committee, and we had members from across the political divide on that. There was some good work done, and I want to acknowledge the Honourable Trevor Khan, a former member of this place, who was involved in that, and also the late Dr John Kay, who again was also very, very much involved in that inquiry. But what we did, which did seem significant at the time, and the longer I've been here, the more significant it seems, is we actually had a unanimous committee report. And I know that the Honourable Robert Borzak was a member who is still here who was on that committee. So we had everyone from the Shooters to the Greens to the Nats to the Libs and Labor all agreeing that actually medicinal cannabis is something that should be available in this state. And I'm really proud of that work that we did. And I note that the motion talks about it then coming into effect a couple of years later. One of the issues that we did grapple with through that inquiry was not about the need for access. There were many, many stories coming from people who, as the Honourable Jeremy Buckingham said, happens probably still now, is people were using it. People were sick, they were dealing with cancer treatments, they were using it to stimulate their appetite. People with AIDS were using it for those purposes. So it was about how do you regulate a way to bring it in safely, and the supply issue was something that we really grappled with the committee at the time, but it was definitely clear that the need was there. And I think what the member is saying in his motion around making sure that you've got patient safety, evidence-based prescribing, clinical integrity being central to the medicinal cannabis framework, I wholeheartedly agree with. People want to access this drug because it helps them when they feel sick, it helps them feel better, and it really should be that simple. And I think anything that we can do, working with the TGA, working with the right agencies to make sure that that regulation is in place, that this is being done properly within those right clinical frameworks and guidelines is really important. So 95% of this motion I wholeheartedly support. It's the parts D and E in number 8 that I think are problematic. Hopefully the amendment to remove those is passed. Then it's something all of us in the House can get behind and support.
Thank you. The Honourable Rachel Merton.
President, I rise in opposition to the Honourable Jeremy Buckingham's motion pertaining to cannabis, and again I record my total opposition to any attempt to water down the existing prohibitions on the use of cannabis. Mr President, while Mr Buckingham's motion is framed as a health reform and we value and recognise the medicinal qualities of cannabis, this is taking it a whole lot further. The reality is, what is before, it's a Trojan horse, in effect, opening the gates to the widespread legalisation. The community are concerned and astounded that this is now looking at drivers under the effects of cannabis. Issues, questions, concerns remain unanswered around insurance. Legal access to cannabis is often held up as a tightly controlled and regulated exception that exists for the unwell. The medicinal grounds, we've heard of the value and the benefit of that. The reality, however, is once it's accepted that cannabis can be prescribed and socially normalised, we need to uphold that framework. The plan will result, the concern here is in the widespread use and misuse of cannabis. Cannabis is not an ordinary medicine. It is an addictive drug with huge risks to users. We can't walk away from the facts, the dangers relating to cannabis. What does it say if the council here tonight supports the motion? It sends out a message that a drug like cannabis is risk-free. It's okay in the community. It's okay for drivers. The fact remains cannabis prescribing has already been on the rise in Australia and is dispensed with and in the community. Mr President, we have to look overseas and look at the examples in Canada where we've had the increased use of this drug, both on grounds of medicinal use and not. Look at Colorado. The legalisation saw the youth use of cannabis increase. The health effects, the increased risk of psychosis for young men, it can't be ignored. Mr President, in conclusion, I also put forward my concerns relating Section 8D and E. I commend the Coalition's amendments in addressing this, and those sections stand to water down the roadside drug testing laws and cobble together a defence for cannabis-affected drivers when they're pulled over by the police. There can be no doubt,
The
Mr.
member's time
President.
has
Thank you.
expired. Minister Hursos. The Honourable Natalie Ward.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank the Minister. I also rise to say that I do think that the motion generally brought by the member is entirely consistent with his mantra and his whole party, and welcome him bringing it. We have had these debates for quite some time, and I do hear the consistency with which he and the Honourable Kate Fairman and many others in this place recognise, as do we, recognise that medicinal cannabis, in fact, Mike Baird was responsible for leading the charge on understanding the challenges faced by people needing some form of these.
Lucy, Dan Haslam.
Lucy and Dan Haslam, who he met with and understood their plight, and of course sought to make their lives easier by decriminalising this. That said, I of course come to this place as Shadow Minister for Transport, and formerly, nothing more formal than a former, but former Minister for Metropolitan Roads, and note that it was brought to me at the time as well, and the overwhelming advice from government agencies and others were that, and particularly road safety, people were that there is just no way to measure impairment, and that is why the opposition will be seeking to move these amendments so that we can recognise that the difficulty faced by police, families and people who are pushing for road safety, incidentally on a day when we had a road safety forum here in New South Wales Parliament, that extraordinarily we don't have, unfortunately, a test for impairment. And while we understand the plight, when that test is there and we can have a roadside test, that would be very helpful. The Coalition, of course, moved the Three Angels law where we combine drug and alcohol testing. So for those reasons, and I think the Honourable Rachel Merton's quite right in her concern for road safety users and our mantra about towards zero, we must follow through with that. Of course, we will support the motion if these amendments in our amendments as a coalition opposition to 8A, D and E are removed. We can live comfortably with the balance of the motion in those circumstances, and we would urge the government to consider that in light of the great dangers and the very clear concern by community road safety groups, family advocacy groups, those survivors who are left behind by the tragedy of road crashes. So for those reasons, I rise to support the Leader of the Opposition's amendment to remove 8D and E on behalf of those families that have a gap at their family dinner table and every single day live with the consequences of road safety issues. We must consider those people as well as others that are dealing with these great issues. So for those reasons, I support the amendments moved by the opposition.
Thank you. The Honourable Courtney Hursos.
Thank you, Mr President. And I welcome those comments from the Honourable Natalie Ward in relation to roadside testing and certainly the need for road safety, but I can indicate the government won't be supporting the opposition's amendments in relation to this because we think really as I outlined in my contribution earlier, the motion is a considered and thoughtful outline of the problem and does give an indication of where we should perhaps head with future policy reform. It certainly outlines the challenge in relation to which other speakers have really reflected on in relation to impairment and testing, and it's not one that we're necessarily going to solve here, even though this has been an excellent discussion, I think, in the Legislative Council tonight on a really important issue, but it's certainly one that the government takes seriously and will consider going forward. So I certainly, by opposing the amendment, we're not indicating that we're opposed to the introduction of a medical defence or that we're supporting that or and I want to be really clear, we're not in any way foreshadowing future policy announcements, but our belief is that the phrasing of the motion indicates that there is more work to be done on this important issue, and we absolutely acknowledge that that is the case.
The Honourable Jackie Munro.
Thank you, Mr President. I just wanted to offer some brief additional insight as I was a member of the Cannabis Inquiry that in Victoria there is currently a review being undertaken by academics at Swinburne University that will give us an idea of how effective the impairment-based roadside testing has actually been. And it is important that we review that evidence once it comes out, hopefully this year. That was the indication from that inquiry, that it would be released publicly, and we will be able to make further judgments on the shape of the policy that we want to enact in New South Wales with reference to some of that work. So I look forward to that being made public, and that we can understand just what has occurred in Victoria and whether that is going to be applicable to how we want to run our policy here in New South Wales.
Thank you. The Honourable Jeremy Buckingham in reply.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and thank you to all members who made very thoughtful contributions. I think it's a recognition of how complex the issue is, that we have been discussing it for essentially a decade. And I think we're coming to the sort of pointy end of that discussion. And I recognise the concern of the coalition and community members about this issue, and it's a real issue. There was a point well made by the Honourable Stephen Lawrence regarding and I concur with him that you cannot just have an absolute rule for medicinal cannabis patients, because there is still an illegality, despite my party's position, and probably still will be for a very long time when it comes to cannabis. But I do think that it is not beyond our capacity to develop a system at the roadside that police can enforce, that ensures that medicinal cannabis patients can drive, and that impaired drivers are removed from the roadside. We brought in the blood alcohol regime. When that first came in Tasmania, it was 0.08. It moved to 0.05. It was calibrated. There is science around blood levels for cannabis, and there is emerging science around levels of THC in various other tests as well. And I think that that we can use that science, and we can do so in the future to ensure the primacy of road safety. Make sure that our roads are safe, impaired drivers are not driving. One of the key elements, of course, and I indicate that I will not be supporting the amendments, of course, that's the issue of the RDT, but the TGA is doing its job. It has not taken people out of the scheme. What it has essentially been doing in the review is reducing the amount of cannabis people are being prescribed, and the strength of that cannabis. So that's a really important iteration in the process. And as the Honourable Jackie Munro has said, there is research that is underway and has emerged from Swinburne that I think we can rely on, and other jurisdictions, when it comes to that nexus of impairment and THC and road safety. And I think that we can be assured that our police, our agencies, the Centre for Road Safety, Health and others can come up with a solution if we continue to the discussion and work together to solve that problem, to make sure medicinal cannabis patients are prescribed appropriately, getting good advice from the doctors, that no one who's impaired on the road and those people who are impaired are taken off. Thank you. I commend the motion to the House.
Thank you very much. Before I move the motion, can I take the opportunity to welcome to the chamber the Attorney-General, the Honourable Michael Daly, and his guests. You are always welcome in this chamber anytime. The question is the motion of the Honourable Jeremy Buckingham be agreed to. All those of that opinion, please say aye. That is not the case. The case, I was mislaid because of the appearance of the attorney. So, the Honourable Jeremy Buckingham has moved private members' business item number 3134, to which the Honourable Damien Tudor-Hope has moved that the question be amended by omitting paragraph 8E. The question is the amendment of Mr Tudor-Hope be agreed to. All those of that opinion, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. I think the ayes have it. No. Noes have it. The divisions required, ring the bells. Well done, Beverly. people who I thought might be guilty of doing that. Exactly. Thank you. Understood. Lock the doors. The question is the amendment of the Honourable Damien Tudor Hope be agreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the opposition whip and deputy opposition whip as tellers for the ayes. The government whip and deputy government whip as tellers for the noes. Order. There being 16 ayes and 22 noes, the question is resolved in the negative. Unlock the doors. We now move to the substantive motion of the Honourable Jeremy Buckingham. The question is that private member's business item number 3134, standing in the member's name, be agreed to. All those of that opinion, please say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. A division is required. Ring the bells. Is leave granted for a short bell? Yes. Leave is granted. It is indeed. Lock the doors. The question is the motion of the Honourable Jeremy Buckingham be agreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the Government Whip and Deputy Government Whip as tellers for the ayes, the Opposition Whip and Deputy Opposition Whip as tellers for the noes. There being 22 ayes and 16 noes, the question is resolved in the affirmative. Unlock the doors. I report the receipt of a message from the Legislative Assembly forwarding the Property and Stock Agents Amendment Underquoting and Other Agent Conduct Bill for concurrence. The Honourable Courtney Houssos.
Thank you, Mr President. I move that this bill now be read at first time and published.
The question is the bill be now read a first time and published. All those of that opinion, please say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Property and Stock Agents Amendment Underquoting and Other Agent Conduct Bill 2026, first reading.